Kaixo, egunon guztioi, mila esker gaur gurekin izateagatik. Mi nombre es Pablo Idobro, soy el responsable de la oficina en Singapur de la Agencia Vasca de Internacionalización, desde la que damos apoyo a las empresas vascas con interés en los países del sudeste asiático. Os damos la bienvenida a este webinar, centrado en materia de certificación HSA para los dispositivos y tecnologías médicas en Singapur y en cómo aprovechar dicha certificación de cara a la entrada en Singapur y otros mercados de la región. El sector de la salud y las biociencias continúa en crecimiento en Singapur y otros países de esta región, especialmente en Tailandia, y presenta oportunidades para las empresas con dispositivos y tecnologías punteras. Este webinar se enmarca dentro de varias acciones que venimos desarrollando en el sector, de cara al acercamiento de las oportunidades que representa para las empresas vascas. Además de otros webinars y acciones presenciales que hemos organizado en los últimos años, en breve publicaremos un informe detallado del sector en Singapur, el cual estará disponible para todas las empresas vascas con interés en conocer más detalles sobre esta industria. Llevaremos a cabo este webinar en inglés. Welcome everyone to our webinar on biohealth sector regulation and market access in Singapore. Now, let me introduce the speakers that we will have today. Medical devices in Singapore are regulated by Health and Science Authority, HSA, a statutory board under the Ministry of Health that is responsible for the regulation of health products. So first, we will have Ms. Wong, Assistant Group Director for the Medical Devices Cluster of the Health and Science Authority of Singapore. She will share an overview on the regulatory framework for medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and digital health. After Ms. Wong, we'll have Mr. Evin Liu, Group Executive Director of Access to Healthcare. Access to Healthcare is a global consulting company that helps small and medium-sized medical technology companies in their end-to-end commercialization journey in several markets, having offices in all the main markets in Asia, such as Singapore, Thailand, China, India, Vietnam, and others, as well as some European countries like the UK and Germany. Mr. Evin will give the audience an overview of the different healthcare markets in ASEAN, with a special focus in Singapore and Thailand, as well as discussing about market entry strategies in the region. We will finish the webinar as usual with a question and answer session. So please, if you have any question, write it in the comment section. Now, let me introduce you to our first speaker, Ms. Wong from HSA. Ms. Wong, the floor is yours. You can start with your presentation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. As you have mentioned, I'm from HSA, Health Sciences Authority, that is responsible for regulating health products. And I'm actually in charge of the medical devices cluster, which is regulating medical devices in Singapore. So without much delay, I'll go into the presentation. Could I have my slides, please? Yeah, this is the topic of my today's presentation, regulatory controls in Singapore for medical devices, including in vitro diagnostic and digital health. There's an outline of my presentation. I'll include the regulatory guidelines and then how we administer the total product lifecycle approach, which deals with dealers control, product controls, and post-market obligations. I'll start off with the regulatory guidelines. This is a busy slide. It's actually just taken wholesale as a definition of medical device as stipulated in the first schedule of our Health Products Act. I'll move to the next slide to explain what this is all about. Actually, medical device in Singapore just means it's an instrument, appliance, implant, software, etc. that is intended for use on humans. So we do not regulate devices for animals, and it's not a drug. It's used for diagnosis, treatment, prevention, and monitoring of a clinical condition. It's either for contraception, sustain life and for disinfecting of medical devices. I'd just like to highlight that if you look at the bottom of B, there are also 3 articles that are regulated as medical device: any implant for the modification or fixation of any body parts, injectable dermal fillers, and any instrument for the removal of or degradation of fats. So with this definition, and this is a definition of in vitro diagnostic, not very different from the in vitro definition from other jurisdiction. It just means that it's some reagent or reagent product that is meant for in vitro examination of any specimens, and our definition includes a specimen receptacle. And for software, we only regulate software or mobile apps that is intended for medical purposes, that is for diagnosis, treatment, patient monitoring. Software and mobile apps that are meant solely for well-being or lifestyle purposes, for example, fitness trackers, are not regulated by HSA because they are not meant for medical purpose. Such products, actually, we require such products to include a clarification statement or something equivalent to state that they are not meant for the medical diagnosis, treatment, or patient monitoring purposes. Some examples of software. Forms of software can be either software embedded in medical devices, standalone software, standalone mobile applications, which all of us are very familiar with, or web-based software. So all this software could be a form of software that can be a medical device if they have medical purpose. Another group of products that is not a medical device, sometimes in vitro diagnostic products that are meant for research use, or commonly called RUO products, are not regulated. Only when they are used as IVD, then they are regulated as medical devices. And like I mentioned earlier, devices for animal use only are not regulated by HSA. So with these definitions in place, I'll go into the total product life cycle approach that HSA takes to regulate medical devices. So this is the product life cycle approach. We start off with research, lab bench testing, design and manufacturing, which then proceeds on to clinical trial, marketing authorization, and post-market surveillance, which often fits back into the design and manufacture to improve the product, and it goes down the chain again. So it's really a life cycle approach. And what we regulate is of course, in Singapore, the marketing authorization for medical device, once it's approved, is on our medical device register. And we also monitor real-world effectiveness and require adverse event and field safety corrective action reporting. So I first go into dealers control. In Singapore, dealers, we are referring to manufacturers, importers, and wholesalers. That's the dealers control. I elaborate on the controls that are required later. Then there's product control, where the products needs to be registered. Certain risk class needs to be registered and certain not so. And then there's post-market obligations, where all medical devices dealers are required to have this obligation. So I mentioned about dealers control. You have local manufacturing, importing, and wholesale, depending on the activity. So for local manufacturing, they require a manufacturer's license. Importing activity, you need importer's license, and wholesale, you need wholesaler's license. In order to obtain the license for manufacturer's license, you need to be certified to the ISO 13485 certification for medical devices. For importer and wholesaler, you have an option either to be certified to ISO 13485 or GDP MDS or SS620, which are good distribution practice for medical devices. That SS620 is the Singapore standard that is meant for importers and wholesalers to have good distribution practice. So these are the requirements that the dealers will need to in order to apply for the licenses. So for ISO 13485, companies who are in medical device would be very familiar with this ISO standard. There are actually standard for medical device quality management system that touch on design and development, production, storage, distribution, installation, servicing, and final decommissioning and disposal. Whereas for SS620 is more for distribution, so it's more on the handling and storage part, the delivering, installations, secondary assembly, and other related activities. So the certification required depends on the activity that is being carried out at the dealer's premises. In terms of product control, we have medical device can be broadly divided into general medical devices and in vitro diagnostic. Even the digital health can be divided in these two, and how they are risk-based classified depends on, for general medical devices, depends on whether on the contact duration. The longer contact duration, the higher risk class it will be. The degree of invasiveness, if it's more invasive, is a higher risk class. Active or inactive, and whether it incorporates other therapeutic drugs or biological materials. Whereas for in vitro diagnostic, the risk classification is based on the impact of the result on individual or public health. Obviously, if the impact is higher on public health, then the risk class will be higher. So who then decide on the classification of the device? Is based on the product owner's intended use and indication. What does the product owner, and product owner refers to manufacturers, what does he intends the product to be for, and what characteristic of the device, and he has to determine the characteristic of the device, whether and that would determine whether it's contact duration, invasiveness, as well as whether or whether it's the impact on the public health of individual is high. We have reference guidance document on our website. These are some of the reference documents that is to touch on the risk classification. So this is the general risk class for general medical devices. Class A is considered low risk, and Class D is high risk. So it's A, B, C, D, 4 level risk classes. Example of low risk class could be wheelchair, tongue depressor, and high risk could be implantable cardiac pacemaker, absorbable sutures. So the way we regulate is the higher risk class, the higher regulatory control it will be subjected to. And this is the risk class for in vitro diagnostic. Again, 4 risk class, A being the lowest and D being the highest. And for in vitro diagnostic is dependent on the impact to public health and individual health. So if the impact to public and individual health is high, for example, in ABO blood grouping system or HIV test kit, they are considered high risk, whereas culture medium and sample collection kit are considered low risk, which will be low, Class A. On our website, you can find this medical device classification tool. It's an online tool that you can use to help you to do a risk classification of your product by answering some questions. We also publish guidelines on our website on the risk classification of standalone medical mobile applications and risk classification of standalone medical device and software. These are all available on our website. A little bit on artificial intelligence. This is a hot topic now, and a lot of medical devices now are incorporate artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence or AI that is intended for medical purposes, for example, diagnosis, treatment, or patient monitoring, are regulated by HSA as medical device. We usually call it AIMD. But if the AI that is used in hospital solely for administrative function, example for patient monitoring, scheduling, they are not regulated by HSA as MD. Also, if it's used, AI that's used for manufacturing process optimization are also not considered medical device and not regulated by HSA. Again, AIMD are risk classified based on their intended purpose, like general medical device and IVD, and which are assigned by their manufacturers or developers. and it looks at what we look at depends on the functionalities and the features. The output from the AIMD and the risk classification approach is similar to what we have for software MD that is available on our guidance document. So as I mentioned, the way we regulate devices depends on the risk class. So when devices are classified under class A, we do not require them to be registered. So they can be on the market. Licensed importers can put them on the market, can import them, and wholesalers can sell them without registering it. However, for class B, C, D, which are of a higher risk, requires registration with HSA, and documentary proof would need to be submitted to HSA for evaluation. So this is the for class A, where registration is exempted. They can come in immediately to market, and only the dealers need to be licensed. For class B and B to D, it needs to be evaluated. The products need to be evaluated by HSA, but we have a system where we leverage on the regulatory approval of reference agency, we call them, which when they have identical labeled intended use in the reference agency. Our reference agency are the Australia TGA, Health Canada, EU, Japan, MHLW, and US FDA. What it means is that if the product has been registered in any of these reference agency, then the product can come, and provided they have safe marketing history, then the product can have a shorter turnaround time for evaluation, and the cost for registration is also lower. So in terms of the different evaluation route, we have full, which is the for BCD, we have full for products that are not registered in any of our reference agency. So later I'll show you what kind of documents are required to be submitted for this evaluation. And obviously, because full registration, it has not been evaluated in any reference agency, so we do the evaluation from scratch. Turnaround time is higher, as well as the cost is higher. However, if it's registered in one reference agency, then it can come in as a breach evaluation. Then the turnaround time is slightly shorter and cost is lower. So in class C and D, we also have expedited if they are excluding those that are in the exclusion list. If they are registered in one reference agency or two reference agency with no marketing, no adverse marketing history, safely being marketed globally, then they can come in through the expedited route, which means that the turnaround time is even shorter than a breach, and the cost for registration is lower. So this is just a summary of the different routes of evaluation that we have for medical devices. This is the turnaround time that I mentioned for different routes and for the different routes and the different classes. You may notice that there's this immediate route for class B and class C. Actually, this class C immediate route is only for software, mobile apps, and then for class B is for products that have been registered in two reference agency with safe marketing history. Then they can come in as under the immediate route. And for class C mobile apps, if they have approval from one reference agency, they can come in through immediate route. What does this immediate route means? It means that the company can submit the application, and once you submit the application, you can market the product, and we in HSA will do back-end review to ensure that the product meets the requirement. So there is still a need for submission of the dossier, but the marketing is straight upon submission. We also have something what we call the priority review. Maybe we should also has a shorter turnaround time compared to the full route. I'll elaborate a little bit more on the priority review, on what the criteria refers to. This is a busy slide, but I'm sure the slide, and you can also find this information on our website. I just wanted to show some of the submission requirements for the different routes, full, abridged, and for the different risk class as well. You can find this information on our website. And examples, these are some of the examples of the design verification and validation study that we require. This is the preclinical studies that we require, and clinical evidences that we require for the claims could come in the form of literature review or clinical studies. For software as a medical device, we have also developed this life cycle approach to software, which incorporates everything that is required for developers of software medical devices, and includes a quality management system, the dealer's license requirement, pre-market product registration requirements, the change control post-market, especially including the cybersecurity requirements and the artificial intelligence requirements. For software maker that has the capacity to communicate and connect with other systems, such as the following, we actually require them to have good cybersecurity assurance. It's critical for manufacturers to consider an effective cybersecurity strategy so as to address all possible cybersecurity risks, not only during development, but throughout the useful life of the software medical devices. So to ensure this, these are the following information that needs to be submitted during product registration for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity control measures are in place. So example, the design control, the cybersecurity vulnerabilities, known and foreseeable risks, the risk analysis that's focused on assessing the risk of patient harm, and mitigation measures that are being taken or implemented. And the information should also have evidence to show that the security of the device or effectiveness of the security control have been verified, and what ongoing plans the company has, process or mechanism for surveillance or timely detection and management of cybersecurity related threats during the whole useful life cycle, useful life of the device, especially when there's a breach or vulnerability is being detected in the post-market phase. As we all know, this can happen anytime. It's critical for all medical devices. So for AI MD, AI medical device, for some additional requirements that we require, that AI MD must define its boundary, define the intended purpose and functionalities, what it can do and what it will not do. It has to ensure it has to have well-defined input data based on the training data, performance specification for each assigned function, and control measures. So these are the regulatory requirements that we require for AIMD. Those that are based on the quality, safety and efficacy, the preclinical studies, and the retraining model and monitoring, real-world effectiveness, and the cybersecurity risk, that is the benefit risk considerations. So those that I've explained earlier are the pre-market considerations and pre-market controls that we have. We also have post-market obligations. For post-market obligations, it's applicable for all type of devices, whether it needs to be registered or not. So from Class A to Class D. So the dealers need to maintain records of manufacture or supply for the whole useful life or 2 years after the date. Record of complaints 5 years after the expiry of the projected useful life. Compliance, the dealers also need to have compliance with advertisement control. They need to report adverse events and field safety corrective action. This is the definition of our adverse events and adverse effect, and we have specific reporting timelines for the adverse event reporting to us. whether it's within 48 hours for very serious threat to public health, within 10 days for death or serious deterioration in the state of health, and within 30 days where reoccurrence might lead to death or serious deterioration of health. And for field safety corrective action, we also have notification timeline, 30 days for those that needs to be initiated in our country, and notification prior to our initiation, prior to the initiation of field safety corrective action. So for supporting innovation, we have medical device development consultation. This is a service that we provide to companies to come in to discuss with us very early in the development stage on their product. So they okay, this is where I want to say during the consultation, they can consult on the regulatory strategy, the claims, the safety performance data, and sterility, biocompatibility, risk management, and clinical trials. So the companies can book the appointment with us almost 5 months ahead, but 1 month ahead of the consult, they need to provide documents for us to look through, and then during the consultation, we will provide the discussion. During the discussion, so that we can have a fruitful discussion with them regarding the queries that they have. So this pre-market consultation has proven to be useful for especially software developers that are newly developing medical devices. And of course, we also have pre-market, pre-submission consultation. These are more for companies who are first time coming to Singapore. They already have their dossier, but they are not sure whether it meets Singapore requirement. This is just a quick review for us to go through the documents to see if the documents that they are going to submit are complete, so that they can submit with and they will not receive too much queries from us. So this is what I've mentioned earlier regarding the timeline for the appointment and document submission. And this is the QR code for the appointment booking. These are some of the documents that we have also done up, and it's on our website that talks about how we actually support digital health products. We have regulatory guidelines for telehealth products. We have, I mentioned earlier, immediate registration pathway for standalone software and mobile applications, the device consultation scheme. We have the regulatory guidelines for software medical devices that I mentioned earlier, and also the artificial intelligence in healthcare clinical guidelines. I mentioned earlier a little bit about the priority review, which I say I will elaborate. We have a priority review scheme, which if the product falls under these 5 healthcare focus area: cancer, diabetes, ophthalmic diseases, cardiovascular diseases, and infectious diseases, and they are intended for a medical purpose with no existing alternative treatment, or it represents a breakthrough technology that provides a clinically meaningful advantage over existing legally marketed technology, they can come in through this priority review. This priority review actually allows them to have a shorter turnaround time, which means faster, for them, faster, the ability to have the product faster in the market. And this is the AIMD guidelines that I mentioned earlier, which is developed by jointly by our Ministry of Health and Synapse. Is actually touches on is a very good guideline for AI developers and implementers. So good resource for developers of AIMDs. This is a summary of the regulatory controls that I've described earlier, and where are the touch point for us. So design and development, we have our device consultation. Then during for products that in the market, coming into a market, you need a dealer's license for the dealers, and then products that require registration, you need to come in. And then for registration, that's the pre-market part. And once it's on the in the market, there's also the post-market requirement where if there are changes, you need to inform HSA and get it evaluated, and of course reporting of AE and FSCA. I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Wong, for your presentation. Very insightful. Of course, I think that the regulation of each category of medical devices to be certified will require further investigation by our companies, of course. But I think that thanks to your presentation, they will have a very comprehensive knowledge of the regulation, the process, and the timeline for the certification of medical devices in Singapore. So thank you so much. Let me introduce now to the audience our second and last guest of the day, Mr. Evin Liu from Access to Healthcare. Evin, you can go ahead with your presentation.
All right, Ola, thank you very much. Can you all hear me? I hope so. Right, please turn on the slides. Thank you very much. So just now, Wei Jun has explained about the regulatory framework of Singapore. So many times you have heard that Singapore usually would become the springboard for the rest of the ASEAN countries, which of course has much more population, much more healthcare framework to talk about, right? So as a result, many would think that, oh, maybe we just land in Singapore, get some business, then after that we just do the real thing in other countries. Is this true or is this not? And many times you would find people asking questions such as, right, if you register one country in ASEAN, does it mean that we could go to the rest, just like in the EU, right? So we will find out in a while. So firstly, right, the ASEAN market. What is ASEAN? And is it growing? Right? What's the profile like? And I just chose Singapore versus Thailand. It's not really a case where it's meant to be a comparison, but it's meant to just let everybody understand, right? There are very different dynamics between various countries in ASEAN. I could have easily picked any other country. I just decided to choose Thailand, right? We are going to go through a few elements of a go-to-market strategy, which I believe is not too much of a stranger to most people, right? We'll go through some areas of a pathway, right, for regulatory, which is usually the first step in any form of market entry, right? We won't spend too much time on the requirements, but we will spend some time on pathways, strategies, and how you could leverage on whatever you have, right, to gain access to the markets quickly. Okay. So ASEAN, right, is an association of Southeast Asia nations, right, was established in the 60s, and with the signing of the ASEAN Declaration, right, then you get some founding countries, right, such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, right? Then in which it grew to 10 countries. So ASEAN is the growing medical and healthcare industry sector in the world. To be honest, right, it's the highest growing sector in the world. It is not just growing, it is very stable. Why? Because other than a few skirmishes here and there, politically it's very stable. ASEAN has been working together since the 60s, so that's 60 years worth of working together, right? And the increasing digitization, education, building of infrastructure has really gotten this region, right, really buzzing, right? I think some of you may have also started to understand that there's been a push to try to improve the local footprint as far as medical technology is concerned, especially in Indonesia and in Vietnam. Okay. One of the areas I think is also well known is because of the advances in healthcare, therefore the aging status of the ASEAN countries is also growing, right? And I believe we have always been hearing about this talk with regards to the gap between life and health, right? So life is how long we live, and health is how healthy we are. And in the ideal situation, right, you will have life and health being the same, but most of the time it's not, right? So how close can we get? But as we live longer, right, then the pressure for us to stay healthy will become higher. So the general healthcare market of ASEAN countries, right, is that it is mostly self-pay, right, or a subsidy model, right? You will see that in Singapore and Thailand, they're slightly different, right? I just use that as an example. So private healthcare is growing in larger ASEAN countries, and this is because of increasing education, right? And especially some of the brighter ones that have gone overseas and come back to the country to contribute to the country, right? There's a lot of clinics and a lot of medical centers. So in some countries, like for example, in the more affluent parts or larger cities in China, there's no such thing called clinics, right? And telemedicine and e-pharmacies are getting strong considerations. So this is in line with some of the larger countries which have started to do so because of logistical reasons. Now let's zoom into this Singapore and Thailand example, and I have to use my glasses. Okay, in terms of medtech infrastructure, so there's been some kind of development as far as the medtech industry is concerned, right? So even though here in the slide it says that it's home to more than 60 multinational medtech companies that do R&D and manufacturing, there are approximately 350 medical device SMEs and startups, right? If you move into Thailand, then you will realize that the number of startups is actually about the same, even though Thailand is a much larger country. The reason for this is because, right, Thailand has been making a lot of money just doing contract manufacturing, right? And they do it in automotive, they do it in plastics, and they gradually did it as well in the medical technology industry, right? In the last 10 years, I think that their education has really gone up. And even though they are falling birth rates, the education system is still very good, and they started to have some kind of incubation programs and accelerator programs to start to create startups. SMEs is few and far between. The reason for that is because 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there wasn't any kind of environment for it, right? So with that, right, you will see that the government funding, academic expertise and all that is far more developed in Singapore than in Thailand. But that said, right, Thailand, because of it having a larger country, right, and being able to cut up quite a lot of money with regards to investment into technology, they're starting to really rise up. And it's actually not very difficult for them to create the kind of medical hubs in which Singapore has a few. One of the areas, right, is that Singapore is also home to medical tourism, right? Because there are patients from other countries coming into Singapore. So the private healthcare in Singapore is actually fairly good. That said, right, Thailand is actually the region's largest medical tourism country, right, by far. And it's not necessarily just restricted to Phuket or Bangkok. It's actually also moving into areas in the north, right, in the countryside, where you get a very nice balance of lifestyle as well. Okay, Thailand private hospitals are top notch, right? Fortunately, unfortunately, I have been into one, right, as a patient, and doctors are fairly skilled as well. Again, a lot of them actually travel and studied or practiced overseas and came back to Thailand to contribute to the country. Look into the statistics, right, of the countries, right? You have 5.76 million against 70, right? Life expectancy is, well, I think Singapore is slightly higher, right? And the population greater than 65 easily, right? Singapore is much significantly higher than in Thailand. Then you look into the very last box, right, where it talks about the number of hospitals and specialty centers, number of in which is divided kind of like into public and private hospitals, versus the number of hospitals you can see in Thailand. Does that mean that all the healthcare workers in Singapore are overworked? No. That means, right, that actually the number of people that go into the hospital isn't probably as much as what you would expect in Thailand. The hospital size in ratio to the population of Singapore is different, because Thailand has a larger population and they actually have many small hospitals. Where do these hospitals reside? They're actually all in the province, right? So if you look into the Thailand market, right, always remember there are actually 3 countries. There's Phuket, there's Bangkok, and there's the rest of Thailand. Now let's move into an area, right, where we look back at the high-level structure of the 5 key elements to go-to-market strategy. Everybody kind of knows about the market segmentation, right? Where's my product position? I think everybody in the audience would know this. Intellectual property. Do you need to file a patent? Right? Is it really necessary? Right? Would somebody copy my things? Is it worth filing patent for? One of the points that I always highlight to many manufacturers is that if you file a patent, right, you are actually being forced to disclose, right, what your invention is, right, because then people cannot copy it. But at the same time, people can circumvent this. So unless it's something that's really unique, right, and really novel, and in which circumvention isn't so easy, then okay, then you file. But if it's not, right, then I suggest you just keep it as a know-how. Reimbursement, I think it does get impacted by the way in which the healthcare policies are actually created in these ASEAN countries. So therefore, there isn't so much of the social or health insurance kind of scheme, but more of the subsidy and self-pay. So because of that, right, then you have to watch out for the pricing of your product, right? Because suddenly you realize that you can't use reimbursement or use some kind of insurance policy to pay for the product. Clinical activities, right, will depend on whether the clinical workflow, not just about the clinical studies, but whether the clinical workflow fits, right? Because in different ASEAN countries, you have different sized hospitals, different expertise, different equipment, right? Different workflow, how they acquire patients, right? What happens post-discharge, all that. They're all different, right? So you have to really study deeply into all these different countries and do not assume anything. And finally, we talk about the regulatory strategy, in which we did once mention that, or because of the ASEAN Medical Device Directive, are we truly harmonized? Actually, the answer is no. Now let's put a little bit of focus, right, in which we talk about the global regulatory framework. Not so much about ASEAN, but globally, right? First of all, right, you have to first decide, right, whether your device is really a device, right? And if it's not a device, then maybe you don't have to do registration and then just go straight through, right? Okay, if it's a device, right, then you have to determine what's the device classification. I think in ASEAN is trying very hard to harmonize to the ABCD, which is very similar to the class 1, 2A, 2B, and class 3 in the European Union, right? It's similar, but not exactly the same, right? So you've got to be really careful about that. Then in which when you look into a country, right, then you start talking about the regulatory pathway, in which you talk about complexity, the timeline, and costs, right? Then in which complexity will be in the form of what kind of technical documents, what kind of legal documents. It's not so much legal documents in the European Union, other than filing with the competent authorities. But when in ASEAN countries, right, this is kind of like a legacy. You still have it, right? So timeline could vary by a lot. Like I think someone just asked me before even the webinar, right? If you throw an MRI into Vietnam, how long will it take? And actually the answer is less than a month. Why? Because it's Class B. When you throw an X-ray, it take you up to 12 months. Why? Because it's Class C. And why? Because of that. It's because it's being reviewed by different regulatory authorities within Vietnam. And so we talk about device classification. I think Regent has mentioned about the similarities between ASEAN and the European Union. So we'll go through that, right? And earlier on, we also talked about the common submission dossier template, which is very similar to the technical file in the European Union. Okay, so harmonization is driven by the ASEAN's political will to get things to be the same, right? For example, the CSDT, the Common Submission Dossier Template. So more and more ASEAN countries are using it, right? Post-market and establishment licensing, meaning that the distributors and the manufacturers within the countries are getting licensed, right? But there's still sovereignty into each country, right? Like I mentioned earlier, right? Legal documentations, certificates, letter of authorizations. Sometimes do you need to notarize, do you legalize, do you apostille? Some of these things are still resident in these countries. Of course, in ASEAN, there are different languages, right? Most of the time, more technically driven products, higher risk class would probably accept English. But once it gets into a case where it's point of care, then you will see more and more requirements for local language. So we can skip this actually. I would like to actually go into just now what Regent has mentioned about the various workflows. I think what's probably more useful is to talk about things like a workflow or a decision tree, right? In which, right, you will first determine risk class, right? Is it class A or class B, C, D? Then after which, then you will talk about each and every step thereafter, right? Just now there were discussions about various pathways. If you have two reference agencies, one reference agencies, you have 3 years, no safety events. So all these things, right, are actually ways in which the Singapore market is trying to make it easier for foreign manufacturers to enter the market, right? Because Singapore is a small market, so it needs all it takes, right, to attract different manufacturers to come in to ensure that the population gets the right technology. I think in Thailand, they're also trying various ways, right? And therefore, I think different countries will try different ways to speed things up. My personal favorite is still Vietnam, where they actually have split up class C and D to be reviewed by the Ministry of Health, and class A and B to be reviewed at the district level. So whether you are the district of Hanoi or in Ho Chi Minh, right, they have district government agencies over there that will do so. Why? Because most products, most medical device products are actually class A and class B. So therefore, right, they are employing 80-20 rule. I really like this because this will make sure that more products can be accessed into that 100 million population of Vietnam. Right. So I just want to make some conclusions here. Right. So the ASEAN device market, right, it presents a real significant opportunity for growth. Right. So to navigate this market, it's crucial to develop a very well-informed go-to-market strategy. Right. It's very much tailored into each country's regulatory landscape, competitive environment, and customer demands. Right. So compliance with regulations and product registration process is paramount. Right. Understanding all these unique requirements of each country and developing strategies will be key. Right. And the market continues to evolve, and so therefore, getting yourself hooked on to understand what's the latest and greatest will be crucial for your long-term success. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evan, for the overview on the different markets in ASEAN. I believe it is very interesting for our company to understand the characteristics and challenges of the different health markets in the region. Now that we've finished with the presentations, I would like to have. I'm just going to have one question for each. I would start with Miss Wong. I want to ask, in some cases that there could be some medical devices that in which is not clear which class specifically they belong to. For example, there can be some doubts between class B or class C, for example. How does HSA assess these cases?
Okay, for HSA, there is nothing that we would think is in between class, any class. We will follow the rule-based system that we have, and then determine which class it is depending on the intended use. I mean, sometimes it can be more challenging to determine which class it is, but we would comb through the IFU to determine the risk class and look at the device nature and the intended use to determine the risk class.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, understood. And for Evin, I would like to ask you if you see any gap in the market, especially in Singapore, in the country that we are focusing on, or maybe in Thailand as well, in terms of technologies or medical devices that could be in demand in the future years.
I think technology-wise, most countries are actually fairly well served. Technology is actually, to be very honest, never the problem. The problem, right, is training. If I give you a phone, right, and if the phone is very complex, right, you will need training to use the phone to its fullest capability. Same thing, right? If someone has proton therapy thrown into Cambodia, there must be somebody that actually knows how to operate, right? So it's very easy to push technology, but the challenge, right, is actually getting the people trained, right, in the language, and not necessarily having enough doctors, but having trained personnel. So I think technology is never a gap, right? It's actually the trained personnel. So when I think Spanish companies wants to get into ASEAN, right, please be ready to train your distributors, train the hospitals, train all the staff, right, and give them proper customer service, right? Because sometimes I think because of the language barrier and because of the size of the market, sometimes, right, this is a bit lacking. So hopefully this is something that you could take note of.
Does such training involve a local presence, or like of the bus company being present in the market physically, permanently, or with temporary visits to the market? Can be
temporary visits usually work, right? I think this is quite commonly practiced by most European countries that are business in Asia. Of course, there are some regional managers that stay in Singapore. I know some of them, right? We go for drinks together too. So therefore they travel around, and of course after the pandemic, everybody learned how to deal with things remotely. So some travel is still good. Some contact is always good. However, nowadays there are more things to bridge this distance and communication gap.
Understood. I think we have one final question from the audience. I think it's for Miss Wong. What information can you provide on the SAR, Special Access Route? What are the advantages of this route compared to the other normal registration process?
Yeah, actually, Special Access Route is not a registration route. As the name says, Special Access is actually for unregistered products to be brought into the market for special instances. Like, for example, the clinicians need it for their surgery and it's not available in the market. There's a special need, a special patient that needs it because of the clinical needs, special clinical needs. So these are special access routes that allow such unregistered devices to be brought into Singapore. But it's not a regular registration route.
Okay. Understood. So it will depend. It will depend on the need, on the specific need of the clinics or the hospitals in Singapore to request that.
That's right.
Okay, understood. I hope that that clarifies. And I think there's no more questions. So just we'll leave it here, and we'll finalize the webinar here. I just wanted to thank our speakers as well as the audience for joining us today, and we hope that the webinar was of your interest. And if anyone in the audience has any doubt or want to know more about the matters discussed today, you can contact me or my colleague in Bilbao, Azucena Castro. And so thank you so much, everyone, and see you in future events.